That rhetoric guy. Are you serious? Don't answer that. It was rhetorical. What exactly does that mean? Whenever I ask students what a rhetorical question is, the inevitable answer is that it is a question not meant to be answered, which isn't exactly correct, but we'll get to that later. But the next question becomes, why? Say you're writing an essay or an opinion article. Why would you ever write down a question when you have no audience yet? When no one could respond? Say you're angry at someone who hurt you. Why would you ever ask them something when you don't actually want to hear a response? What is the purpose of asking a question without an audience? What's the purpose of asking a question without a conversation? Notice I used a bunch of questions there in the intro. We'll get to that later. First off, I like to start with concepts and definitions. So let's go simple. What is a question? Okay, well, getting down this simple means we're inevitably going to run up against exceptions. So all the definitions that I give here are going to be generalities that you could probably poke some holes into, but we have to start somewhere. A sentence is a complete idea that has a subject and a verb, a thing and an action. Now, we categorize sentences by what they do. Sentences can command. They can state a fact. They can express a feeling. A question is just another category of sentence, but one that requires an answer or some other kind of reciprocal response, like a give and take. Rhetoric, if you recall from my previous videos, is the art of manipulating language for a desired effect. So if we put these two together, a rhetorical question is a sentence manipulated to be in the form of a question in order to accomplish some hidden goal. This means that rhetorical questions are actually some other kind of sentence pretending to be a question. In fact, there could be many different layers to it. It could be a question pretending to be a command, or a question pretending to be a statement, which is actually pretending to be a command, or even a question pretending to be an entirely different question. This is why the traditional definition of a question not meant to be answered is basically incorrect, or at least incomplete. A rhetorical question may actually require an answer, but the answer it requires may be obvious, or it may not be obvious at all, or it might not even be related to what the original question literally asked. Humans have further broken up rhetorical questions into subcategories of their own. There's hypophora, which is where you ask a question and then immediately follow up with your own specific answer. Kind of like what I do in the intro to a lot of my videos to kind of prime my audience into thinking about the topic and what they know about the topic before I go on to give my explanations that clarify that knowledge. There's epiplexis, which is where a question is used in place of an insult. Kind of like using demeaning language but hiding behind it. Something like, how could you? You're not a child, are you? There's eretesis, which is more of a philosophical version of epiplexis in that it also implies an answer, but it's different in that it's not insult-based. Like when MLK said, how can segregation exist in the true body of Christ? As I've said in previous videos, I don't think it's necessary to know or memorize all these specific terms. I only offer them here to show you how small differences in the intent or phrasing of the question can begin to show you how and why the question is actually rhetorical, to show you how to decipher the manipulation at play within the question. So now we have the concept and some general definitions at our back. Here's where I usually suggest to my beginning writers that they never use rhetorical questions. But wait, I use them all the time. Am I just being a hypocrite? No. Let's go back to two of the questions that I asked in the intro. What's the purpose of asking a question without an audience? And what's the purpose of asking a question without a conversation? The answer to both of those is that I wasn't actually asking those questions. In fact, I don't agree with the premise behind those questions. I was priming you, my audience, to recognize and realize that we always have an audience. Even if we can't directly talk to them, we're always a part of a greater conversation, even if you don't quite see it. In other words, I asked questions loaded with bad assumptions, questions whose answers would invalidate the foundations of those questions themselves. And my goal in doing that was to make you, my audience, think through this process of rhetoric, think through the relationships inherent in conversations, so that me asking the question in the wrong way forces you to discover the right answer on your own. This is why I don't let beginning writers use rhetorical questions in their essays. They're not thinking that far ahead. In order to be effective and not repetitive and actually meaningful, rhetorical questions need to be built into the foundation of your argument. They need to be detailed. Simply saying, "Have you ever thought about X?" is not detailed enough to make your audience do any work. A rhetorical question is like Inception. You seen that movie? A rhetorical question should not only put the right answer into someone's mind without directly saying it, but it should convince the person that they were the ones to come up with the answer in the first place. This is the power of rhetorical questioning. And if you haven't thought deeply about how you are going to incept the right idea into your audience's head, or why you want your audience to believe that they were the ones to do all the work, then the question falls flat. To finish out this video, I wanted to show the real-world use of rhetorical questions. And since I use a lot of them in my own writing, I decided to take a rant I posted to Facebook and analyze it for you, showing that a stream of rhetorical questions can be effective as long as you have a well thought out plan for them. Before I start, a disclaimer. Anytime I offer my own opinions outside of the facts of rhetoric, which I'm about to do, I want to make clear that these are my opinions only and that you don't have to agree with them. I'm only offering my writing here as an example of method. I'm not trying to push my specific beliefs onto you, at least not in this video. Okay, setup. On MLK Day this year, January 20th, 2020, a gun rights march was held in Virginia. This was my response. I'm honestly pretty tired of the same willfully ignorant, hilariously privileged, dangerously racist, no thought of consequences thinking that pervades gun rights activism. If you don't even know what the first part of the Second Amendment says, why should you even get a say in gun rights? If your first world, rural, white male reality is still steeped in fear and xenophobia, why should you even get a say in the laws of pluralistic society? If you can't acknowledge the racism inherent in creating and participating in such a rally on MLK Day, why should you get to participate in conversations about racial injustice? If you have no data or studies that support your position and can't be bothered to read the massive amount of data and studies that contradict your position, why do you think you should get a say in policy decisions? If your best tactic is to act threatening, imagining that your cowardice masquerading as machismo makes you right, then why should you get a say at all? Gun registration like car registration, ammo limits, mandatory safety and recertification courses, universal background checks that take into account severe mental illness and violent crime. These don't take your rights away, and they would collectively work to reduce firearm deaths and mass shooting incidents as a whole, to bring us closer to a sane, rational way of dealing with weapons. All right, so my first and last paragraphs here are all statements, so we're going to kind of put those aside for the moment. They do put a pretty solid finger on what my position actually is, but it's that second paragraph we're interested in, because the entire second paragraph is nothing but question after question. Now, I would not suggest that beginning writers do this, and if I was teaching a class, I would really want to talk to the student about why they did that. So let's take a look at why I did this. Notice that all of the questions are very highly detailed, but not only that they all ask slightly different things. And if you kind of add up each of those different questions, the implied answers to all of them kind of build to a much larger, more complicated point. If you are going to use a rhetorical question in your essay or argument, make sure you've thought about how and why you're doing it, and more specifically, that you've deeply embedded the implied work into the question. But if you're going to try to use more than one rhetorical question, if you're going to try to do something like I've done here, you need to think through how each question is part of a complex equation. And if you're missing too many variables, if you've repeated the same constants unnecessarily, if you don't use the right operations in the right places, then not only are you going to get an incorrect answer, but the equation is going to be entirely jumbled, and it may not be entirely clear what the point is, and you'll get an entirely wrong answer. Chaining rhetorical questions like this can be extremely powerful and overwhelming, but there has to be method to the madness. Change your audience's mind by forcing them to confront their own expectations. So what's a good rhetorical question?